stopped the match. Someone shouted from the shadows, but no one moved. The underground ring smelled of sweat, sawdust, and anticipation. A single overhead bulb swung gently, carving long shadows across the concrete floor. The crowd pressed in tight. Dock workers, gamblers, stuntmen, and a few men in suits who said nothing and watched everything. At the center stood a figure who seemed less like a man and more like a wall. 7 feet tall, undefeated, and utterly certain of himself. His knuckles cracked like splitting timber as he rolled his shoulders, waiting. Then the door creaked open. A smaller figure stepped in, quiet, composed, almost unremarkable at first glance. No grand entrance, no entourage, just soft footsteps on concrete and a stillness that didn't belong in a room built on noise. Bruce Lee paused at the edge of the light, eyes scanning faces that had already judged him and moved on. He bowed slightly, not to the crowd, not to his opponent, but to the moment itself. A murmur rippled through the room. Some laughed, others leaned closer. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The giant grinned, a slow, confident curl of the lips that said this would be over quickly. But beneath the surface of the room's bravado lingered a question no one voiced aloud. What happens when certainty meets something it cannot measure? The bell hadn't rung yet. The outcome hadn't been written. And in the silence between heartbeats, the real fight had already begun. Los Angeles in 1969 was a city of contradictions. Sunlit boulevards and shadowed alleys, ambition and anonymity, opportunity and quiet exclusion. Bruce Lee moved through it like a man both seen and unseen. By day, he trained actors and taught martial arts to students who admired his discipline, but rarely grasped its depth. By night, he wrestled with a different opponent, the limits others placed on him. Casting directors praised his skill, yet told him audiences weren't ready for an Asian leading man. Producers suggested he smile more, speak less, fit a mold that had no space for his truth. Bruce listened, nodded, and walked away each time with the same resolve hardening inside him. He had come to America chasing possibility, not permission. His small training space in Chinatown echoed with the rhythmic thud of fists against pads. Students came and went, some seeking self-defense, others chasing a mystique they barely understood. Bruce taught them all the same lesson: simplicity, directness, honesty, and movement. Be water, he would say, not as poetry but as instruction. Yet even water meets resistance. Rumors began to circulate through the city's fringe circles, whispers of an underground fight scene where reputations were made in a single night. It wasn't about money alone. It was about proving something in a world that measured worth in narrow terms. Bruce dismissed the talk at first. He had nothing to prove to strangers in dark rooms. But doubt is persistent. Not his own, never that, but the doubt of others, repeated often enough to echo. "You're fast," one stunt coordinator told him, "but size always wins." Bruce smiled politely. Inside, he filed the comment away, not as an insult, but as a question waiting for its answer. The invitation came folded inside a plain envelope, delivered without ceremony. No return address. Just a time, a place near the industrial docks, and a single line: "If skill matters more than size, come prove it." Bruce turned the paper over in his hands, considering not the challenge but the intent behind it. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about hierarchy, the unspoken belief that power belonged to the biggest man in the room. He set the envelope down and returned to training, but his focus drifted. Each strike landed with precision, yet his thoughts circled the same question. When his silence mistaken for surrender? That evening, he visited his wife, Linda, in their modest home. She noticed the distance in his eyes before he spoke. "Another offer?" she asked gently. "Not exactly," Bruce replied. He hesitated, weighing whether to share the details. Linda had seen the cost of his relentless drive, the exhaustion, the quiet frustrations he rarely voiced. Yet she also understood the deeper current that guided him. "Will it help you become who you're meant to be?" she asked. Bruce exhaled slowly. "It might help others see what I've been trying to show them." Linda nodded, not because she craved validation from strangers, but because she knew visibility mattered. Doors did not open on principle alone. Sometimes they opened when someone forced the hinges to move. "Then go," she said, "but come back whole." Her words lingered long after the conversation ended. Coming back whole meant more than avoiding injury. It meant preserving the integrity that defined him. If he stepped into that ring, it would not be to humiliate another man. It would be to challenge an idea. The warehouse district near the docks carried a permanent haze of salt air and diesel fumes. Cranes loomed like skeletal giants against the night sky, and the hum of distant ships blended with the murmur of a gathering crowd. Bruce arrived alone, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but alert. Inside, the space had been cleared to form a makeshift ring outlined by rope and chalk. Spectators leaned against crates and steel beams, their faces half hidden in shadow. Money changed hands quietly. Wagers were placed not just on victory, but on how quickly it would come. Bruce felt their eyes assessing him, calculating height, weight, reach. The verdict was already decided in most minds. Near the far wall stood the giant. He was impossible to ignore, a towering wrestler with shoulders like a doorway, and a record no one had challenged successfully. His name passed through the crowd in hushed tones, followed by stories of men lifted off their feet and deposited outside the ring in seconds. He did not boast. He didn't need to. When his gaze met Bruce's, there was no malice, only certainty. To him, this was another night's work. Bruce bowed slightly. The giant nodded in return, a gesture of mutual acknowledgement. For a moment, the room felt almost respectful. Then the crowd's murmur swelled, and the illusion of civility dissolved into anticipation. Bruce rolled his shoulders, feeling familiar alignment of breath and body. He wasn't here to defeat a man. He was here to dismantle a belief that strength was measured in pounds, that dominance required size, that quiet discipline could not stand against brute force. As he stepped into the chalk circle, he noticed a young man at the edge of the crowd, watching with intensity that bordered on desperation. Their eyes met briefly. The stranger looked away, but the message was clear. This fight meant more than entertainment. It meant possibility. The referee, an aging boxer with a gravelly voice, explained the rules in a tone that suggested they were optional. No weapons, no interference. Stop when one man could no longer continue. The crowd nodded, satisfied. This wasn't a place for technicalities. Bruce listened, then closed his eyes for a moment. In that brief darkness, he centered himself, not on winning, but on clarity. Fear existed, but it did not control him. Doubt hovered, but it did not define him. He inhaled deeply, feeling the air fill his lungs, and exhaled with deliberate calm. Across the ring, the giant stretched his neck and cracked his knuckles. His confidence radiated outward, feeding the crowd's expectation. A chant began, slow, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. Bruce opened his eyes. He remembered his father's teachings in Hong Kong, the discipline of Wing Chun, the philosophy that combat revealed character. He remembered arriving in America with little more than conviction, and a belief that authenticity would eventually find its place. Tonight, authenticity would be tested. The bell, a simple metal bar struck with a wrench, rang out. The giant stepped forward, each movement deliberate, closing distance with the assurance of someone who had never needed to hurry. Bruce remained still for a heartbeat longer than expected, studying the rhythm of his opponent's breath, the subtle shift of weight before each step. The crowd leaned in. In that suspended moment, the fight was no longer about spectacle. It was about whether composure could coexist with pressure, whether a man could hold on to his principles when the world demanded proof in its harshest form. The giant lunged, and everything changed. The first clash was not a collision, but a conversation, one spoken through motion rather than words. The giant reached to seize Bruce in a crushing grip, confident that once he closed his hands, the outcome would be inevitable. Bruce pivoted, redirecting the force with a fluid turn that left the larger man grasping air. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Bruce did not counterattack immediately. He circled, light on his feet, measuring distance and timing. Each step was deliberate, conserving energy, refusing to be drawn into a contest of raw strength. The giant frowned, recalibrating. He had expected resistance, not evasion. Another attempt, faster this time. Bruce deflected the reach with a sharp parry, the sound of contact echoing in the warehouse. The giant's eyes narrowed, less amused now. He advanced with heavier steps, attempting to corner the smaller man against the ropes. Bruce felt the pressure mounting, the physical reality of size and reach closing in. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, sensing the inevitable. For a brief instant, he considered what they saw, a mismatch, a foregone conclusion. But perception was not truth. He slipped sideways at the last moment, the giant's momentum carrying him forward. A precise strike landed, not to injure, but to disrupt balance. The larger man stumbled, catching himself before falling. Gasps broke through the room's tension. Bruce stepped back, hands raised, breathing steady. He did not smile. This was not a performance. It was a demonstration. Across the ring, the giant straightened slowly. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Not fear, never that, but the realization that this opponent did not fit the pattern he knew. The crowd sensed it too. The night was no longer predictable. Minutes stretched, measured in footwork and restraint. Bruce refused to be baited into recklessness. He absorbed the rhythm of the giant's attacks, learning the cadence of his movement, the slight hesitation before each grab. It was like listening to a song and finding the hidden beat beneath the melody. The giant's frustration grew. His strikes became heavier, less precise, driven by the need to reassert dominance. Each misattempt cost him energy, though he would never admit it. He had built his reputation on inevitability. This resistance felt like an affront. Bruce, meanwhile, felt the weight of expectation pressing from all sides. He was not just fighting for himself. He was fighting against every assumption that followed him across the Pacific, every dismissive glance, every closed door. A sudden rush from the giant forced Bruce to the edge of the ring. The ropes pressed against his back. For the first time, escape routes narrowed. The larger man lunged, arms wide, certain this time he would secure his grip. Bruce exhaled. In that instant, he chose not to flee but to step forward into the space his opponent believed he controlled. The movement was subtle yet decisive. He redirected the charge with a precise angle, sending the giant off balance once more. The larger man collided with the ropes, their fibers groaning under the strain. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting in disbelief. Bets were reconsidered mid-breath. Bruce did not bask in the reaction. He remained focused, aware that a single mistake could reverse everything. The giant turned, eyes blazing now, pride wounded more than body. This was no longer about proving size. It was about reclaiming certainty. Sweat darkened the giant's shirt, each breath heavier than the last. He had never needed endurance in this way. Most matches ended before fatigue became a factor. Now, minutes felt like miles. He studied Bruce with a new intensity, searching for weakness, for any sign that the smaller man's composure might crack. Bruce felt his own muscles beginning to tire, the constant motion demanding precision under strain. Yet his breathing remained controlled, a steady anchor in the storm of noise around him. He understood that victory was not a single decisive blow, but the accumulation of disciplined choices. The giant feinted left, then surged right with surprising speed. His hand grazed Bruce's shoulder, just enough to remind both men of the stakes. The contact carried weight, a glimpse of what full capture would mean. Bruce retreated a step, recalibrating. He could not afford complacency. Respect for his opponent's strength was not weakness. It was clarity. At the edge of the ring, the young man Bruce had noticed earlier watched with clenched fists, whispering something under his breath. Hope, perhaps, or a prayer that the world might expand by 1 inch tonight. The giant advanced again, slower now, conserving energy. He spoke for the first time, voice low but audible in the sudden hush. "You're fast," he said, "but everyone slows down." Bruce met his gaze. "Not everyone," he replied softly. The words were not defiance. They were a statement of intent. The turning point arrived without fanfare. No dramatic strike, no sudden collapse, just a decision made in the quiet space between breaths. The giant lunged once more, committing his full weight to the attempt. Bruce saw the opening not as an opportunity to dominate, but as a chance to end the cycle. He stepped inside the reach, redirecting the momentum with a precise shift of balance and a controlled sweep that sent the larger man to one knee. The warehouse fell silent. The giant remained there for a moment, palm pressed against the floor, absorbing the shock not of impact but of realization. He had never been forced down, not by strength, not by technique, not by someone he had dismissed before the match began. Bruce did not advance. He did not strike. He waited. The pause carried more weight than any blow. The giant looked up, meeting Bruce's eyes. In that exchange, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this was no longer about winning or losing. It was about understanding. Slowly, the giant rose. The crowd's roar returned, louder than before, but the energy had shifted. This was no longer spectacle. It was revelation. The match resumed, but its tone had changed. The giant's movements were more measured, his aggression tempered by respect. He no longer chased Bruce blindly. He studied him, adapting in real time. The fight had become a dialogue between two disciplines, one rooted in mass and leverage, the other in precision and flow. Bruce sensed the shift and responded in kind. He did not press an advantage recklessly. Instead, he maintained the balance he had fought to establish, demonstrating control rather than dominance. Each exchange revealed a deeper layer of mutual recognition. The crowd, once hungry for a quick resolution, now watched with rapt attention. They were witnessing something rare, not just a contest, but a transformation of perspective. A brief clinch brought the two men face to face. The giant's grip tightened, testing, not crushing. Bruce countered with a subtle shift that freed him without force. They separated, both breathing hard, neither willing to reduce the moment to brutality. At the edge of the ring, wagers were forgotten, conversations stilled. Even the men in suits leaned forward, their earlier detachment replaced by curiosity. For the first time that night, the outcome felt secondary. What mattered was the dismantling of a belief that size alone determined worth. That difference implied inferiority. The fight continued, but its meaning had already expanded beyond the ring. Fatigue set in, equalizing the field in ways neither man had anticipated. The giant's shoulders sagged slightly, the cumulative cost of missed grabs and redirected momentum taking its toll. Bruce's legs burned from constant movement, each step a negotiation between endurance and precision. They circled slowly, the earlier frenzy replaced by deliberate pacing. The referee watched closely, prepared to intervene if necessity demanded, but neither fighter showed signs of surrender. Bruce recognized the moment for what it was, a test not of technique, but of character. He could press harder, exploit exhaustion, force a definitive end. Yet something within him resisted that path. Victory achieved through humiliation would betray the very principle he sought to demonstrate. The giant, too, seemed to sense the crossroads. He lowered his hand slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. "You're different," he said, voice rough with exertion. Bruce inclined his head. "So are you." The exchange lasted only seconds, but altered the atmosphere irreversibly. This was no longer a battle for supremacy. It was a meeting of equals under extraordinary circumstances. The crowd, sensing the shift, grew quieter, not out of boredom but out of respect. They were witnessing restraint in a place built for excess. The final exchanges were measured, almost ceremonial. Each movement carried intention without malice. Bruce demonstrated techniques with clarity, guiding rather than punishing. The giant responded with controlled strength, testing limits without seeking to overwhelm. At last, the referee stepped forward, raising a hand. "That's enough," he declared, voice firm. "You've both made your point." For a moment, neither man moved. The words hung in the air, offering an exit neither had expected but both understood. The giant extended his hand first, a gesture that spoke louder than any declaration. Bruce accepted it. The handshake was brief but sincere, sealing an unspoken agreement that this night would be remembered not for victory or defeat, but for the collapse of assumptions. The crowd erupted, not in the chaotic roar of gamblers, but in sustained applause. Even those who had come seeking spectacle found themselves moved by something they could not easily name. At the edge of the ring, the young man Bruce had noticed earlier wiped his eyes, the tension in his shoulders easing. Possibility, once theoretical, now felt tangible. Outside the warehouse, the night air carried a cool breeze off the harbor. Bruce stepped into it, lungs filling with the scent of salt and diesel, the noise of the crowd fading behind him. His body ached, but his mind felt unusually clear. The giant emerged moments later, ducking through the doorway. Without the crowd's framing, he seemed less imposing, still massive, but unmistakably human. He approached Bruce with a measured stride. "You could have finished it," he said. Bruce considered the statement. "That wasn't the point." The giant nodded slowly, absorbing the answer. "You change how they see things in there." Bruce looked back at the warehouse, its single bulb casting weak light into the darkness. "Maybe," he said, "but what matters is how we see each other." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Two men who had entered the ring as adversaries and left as something closer to allies. No promises were made. None were needed. As the giant turned to leave, he paused. "If you ever need a training partner," he offered, a hint of a smile breaking through his exhaustion. Bruce returned the smile. "I'll hold you to that." Word of the match spread quietly through Los Angeles, not in headlines, but in conversations. Stuntmen spoke of the night certainty faltered. Dock workers recounted the moment the giant took a knee. Students repeated Bruce's philosophy with renewed conviction, no longer abstract, but proven. Doors did not swing open overnight. Hollywood remained cautious, bound by its own inertia. Yet the narrative had shifted, if only slightly. Bruce was no longer dismissed as merely fast or exotic. He was recognized in certain circles as formidable in ways that transcended stereotype. More importantly, those who had witnessed a fight carried its lesson into their own lives. The young man at the edge of the ring returned to his job with a straighter posture. A stunt coordinator reconsidered his assumptions about casting. Even the men in suits found themselves questioning metrics they had long taken for granted. Change rarely arrives with fanfare. It seeps into cracks, widening them over time. Bruce continued his training, his teaching, his relentless pursuit of authenticity. The fight did not define him. It clarified him. Months later, Bruce encountered the giant again, not in a ring, but in a modest gym where sunlight filtered through dusty windows. They greeted each other with the easy familiarity of men who had shared a crucible. They trained together in silence at first, exchanging techniques, testing boundaries without ego. The giant learned to conserve motion, to value precision. Bruce explored leverage against greater mass, refining principles he would later articulate to students around the world. Between rounds, they spoke of ordinary things: family, work, the peculiar loneliness of being misunderstood. The conversations carried no agenda, only the quiet relief of being seen without pretense. In that space, the true victory of the underground match revealed itself. It had not been about proving one man superior. It had been about expanding the definition of strength to include humility, adaptability, and respect. The gym's mirrors reflected two figures moving in harmony, their differences no longer barriers but sources of insight. Years would pass, and the warehouse near the docks would be repurposed, its chalk circle erased by time and indifference. Those who had gathered there would tell the story in fragments, each version colored by memory. Some would exaggerate, others would downplay. The truth, as always, would reside somewhere between. For Bruce, the night remained a quiet milestone, not because he had faced a giant, but because he had chosen integrity over spectacle. He had stepped into a space built on dominance and left it transformed, if only for a few hours, into a place where mutual respect prevailed. The lesson endured beyond martial arts, beyond Hollywood, beyond the narrow confines of a single fight. Strength, he had shown, was not the absence of vulnerability, but the mastery of it. Courage was not loud. It was steady. And change did not require permission, only the willingness to embody it. Somewhere, perhaps, that young man from the edge of the ring told his children about the night he saw a possibility take shape under a swinging bulb. Perhaps they listened, imagining a world where assumptions could be challenged with grace. The story does not demand belief. It asks only reflection. When have you mistaken certainty for truth? When have you measured someone by the limits of your own imagination? And before you go, one more question remains. From which part of the country are you watching this story?